What is up, everybody? This is Marshall Lee of DonkeyJawProjects.com, and it's the Marsh Makes Comics show, I guess. And we got Mr. Peter Simeti of Alterna Comics here today. How you doing, man?
I'm doing good, man. How are you? Good to connect.
Yes, yes. It's always great to connect. If anybody doesn't know, I have a hard time believing that my audience doesn't know who Peter Simeti is. But if you don't know, Peter makes is a publisher of comics, of some awesome comics that go back to kind of the old ways of using newsprint. And if you pick up his comics, it's just like, I don't know, if you're my anywhere around my age, you used to pick up comics and they were on newsprint and they were floppy and they were awesome. And I don't know what it is about that, but I just freaking love it. And not only that, there's good stories and art and all that too, which is really a bonus.
Yeah,
so
yeah. Well, I'm glad you're digging the comics at Alterna, man. Appreciate that.
I freaking love them. Yeah, so much good stuff there. So let's see. Well, today I wanted to talk about like making basically kind of your best comic, and I guess first and foremost, Peter, just let people know where they can find you, and you do. We won't get super into it just yet, but you do have a pretty cool project going on right now on IndieGoGo. So let people know a little bit about that, if you don't mind.
Well, you can find me on Twitter, I guess, predominantly at petersimeti.com. Well, not .com. Goodness gracious. I'm thinking websites and thinking of Twitter. Just Peter Simeti. I'm overcomplicating it. We got King Cryptid going on right now. King Cryptid is my, I guess you could say, passion project, but it's hard to explain it like that because of the fact that it just feels like I guess we'll talk about that in terms of what the show is about, but it just feels like a story I need to tell, a story that I'm happy to tell, honestly, for the rest of my life. I have so many stories with this. I've always been interested in this subject matter, and the stars have aligned to enable me to actually do this. Whereas before, with the way that Alterna was with Diamond and a couple other things going on with publishing, it didn't really allow me the time to create or to have that schedule to work it out. And now that we're not with Diamond, we haven't been with Diamond since 2020. We were with them previously for 12 years. It's kind of opened up a lot of room for me to finally be able to create again. The last time I had a book out was The Chair, and that was in like 2008, I think. So it's been quite some time. But I'm so glad to be able to finally do this. I'm working with 4 amazing artists on this book. We're doing the first 4 issues, and honestly, I got over 100 issues to tell. So I hope everybody just buckles up and enjoys the ride, and I'm happy to have you guys on this journey with me.
Yeah, totally. And yeah, I'm actually glad we started off by mentioning that. I just put the link in the chat, the live chat, but it's also in the description for the King Cryptid comic, and also the Alterna YouTube channel is in the description. Definitely go and see what everything's all about over there. 'Cause I don't know about anybody else, but I'm super inspired all the time when I watch your videos and read the comics that come out, and all the awesome creators that are involved is really cool and inspiring. So that being said, man, even just what you just said, like, recently I kind of took a hiatus from comics. I was getting back into music, had some life events, all that. So I took a bit of a break, but it was just more for mental health type of thing. But then, finally got to the point where I'm like, okay, I've taken the time I need, and I'm really biting, chomping at the bit right now to get back into comics and get back to my channel. And one of the first things I did was like, okay, let's see what's up at Alterna. What's Peter Simeti doing over there? Because I'm a fan, and I don't know, I just draw a lot of inspiration there. Also went back to some of the old comics that I loved growing up as a kid, and I've actually been digging back into a lot of that stuff recently, as well. Just trying to drum up what first got me, inspired to make stories, to make comics, to do art, all that stuff. And man, when I was watching your video, I found out, oh, he's doing his own comic. I mean, you have a lot of awesome creators making cool comics over there. But to hear that you've got this new comic that's coming out, and just seeing the art, like the actual design of the character and stuff, and I'm like, oh my gosh, this is like, I think this is right up my alley. So I'm like, let me see what this is all about. Let me look through the archives and see where he's talking about this. And I got into, like, you pretty much went through a lot of, like, kind of the history, what got you interested in making this comic and everything. And I just thought it was I don't know, I thought it was interesting that you have this phrase that you've been saying, and also, as somebody who is interested in Alterna, I'm, curious on what kind of stuff gets past the submission level and ends up being an Alterna comic. And one of those things you often say is, I want you to bring a story to me that is a story you need to tell. And that phrase right there, you know it definitely got me thinking, because I'm like, man, I've made a decent amount of comics, mini comics and stuff, and are any of them things I need to tell? Or and if it isn't, what is the story that I need to tell? Um, and so, I've been kind of contemplating that, and then I'm like, oh, you know what? I need to hit up Peter. We need to do a show about this, because you know, I just want to dig deeper into this idea. So one of the things I was thinking, like, I don't know. I guess how would you define that? Because, like, I think from what I remember, you kind of came up with this particular idea, maybe a couple years ago. Is that right? Or
Well, in a way, yes, and in a way, no. I came up with a couple of characters because I knew I wanted to tell eventually a story that revolved around, having monsters of some kind and things like that, kind of like a supernatural element to it. Just something very, very fun, adventure, fantasy, sci-fi, that kind of space. And maybe a little bit of horror too. Anything that merges those three elements, I love it. So I knew I wanted to do something like that, but I didn't know exactly what yet. We were still in Diamond. I didn't know when the heck I could ever do this story. I didn't even know if it would ever be a possibility. I just knew that I had covers to make for it. Came out on a Wednesday, and it would be such a shame to create a character, spend time with it, creating a design and a scene and whatnot to have on the front cover. Because on the issues of those, we put monsters and creatures and some kind of scene like that. And it would be such a shame to waste a good, interesting character on the cover and then never have them back again. So I knew I wanted to do something that had one of those characters in there to be used again down the line. I didn't know when, though. So when I was thinking about making my own story and finally having the ability to go back to that, it was very just instantaneous for me, because I've always been interested in the paranormal. I've always been interested in creatures, the unknown, cryptids, all that kind of stuff. And I thought, I should do a story like that. I should do a story with those things and just create a fun adventure story, and not something that, usually you see those kinds of uh, elements, those kinds of characters, and it's like an anthology. Very just short one and done kind of stories here and there, and that's about it, because there's not a lot of characterization towards those kinds of characters. The humans are generally throwaway elements to either be fodder for the monster, or some kind of hero element that comes in and kills the monster. And the whole point of the story is literally just, really cool monster, some suspense and drama, and then that's it. Uh, there isn't really anything in the way of a deeper meaning, philosophy, characterization, subtext, building up different personalities of these things. That's kind of not really something that happens in a lot of these sort of stories. There's a couple over the years that have done that, but most of them don't do that. So I was thinking I should do that because I'm really drawn to that stuff. I've always been drawn to that stuff. It's kind of gone hand in hand with my interest in comics. And so from there, I started thinking of a name for the character, the look of a character. It's very important, I think, to think of the silhouette, the outline of a character. So when you see it, it's instantly recognizable, whether it's a pose or whether it's just them standing there or whatever it may be. You see Batman and his silhouette, it's Batman. If anybody else ever had that silhouette in comics, you would think they're ripping off Batman. If you see a character that has its fingers out and it's on like a wall, you'd think Spider-Man. If anybody else did that, you'd say they're ripping off Spider-Man. All that kind of stuff. So I wanted something kind of iconic in terms of thinking of just seeing the shadow, and especially thinking of it in terms of a creature of sorts. You want it to be recognizable so people can kind of remember something about it. So I was thinking about those kind of things, and it was just always percolating in the back of my mind for about a year. And one day the name King Cryptid came to me. I didn't think that much about it. It just came to me. And I wrote it down, and I was like, okay, it kind of sounds a little corny. You know, it has that alliteration to it, like an old school comic thing. I'll leave it alone. I'll write it down, and then, you know, I won't think too much about it, and I'll revisit it. And I'll make sure to write down other names. And no other names ever came to me. I came back to it about almost a year later to the same sheet of paper. I was thinking more and more about this character, the background, the look of the character. Things would just kind of come flooding through, and I would write down all these notes. And there's no, it doesn't matter how great of a character you have in terms of design or history or personality or whatever. If the name sucks, it's just never gonna stick. So the only other name I could think of was, it turned out to be his true identity, his real name, which is Crowan. Krowan. And at first I thought I would call the book maybe Crowan the Cursed or something like that. And I was thinking that doesn't really hit the note I want it to hit. I wanted it to hit kind of more of that classic comic book feel, but plus I really wanted it to hit the feel of the way you would see something and describe it. So the way King Cryptid came along and stuck was because the silhouette, he kind of has this crown of bone going on, and he's got like this silhouette that kind of has like a cape to it. And so if you would see him, if this was a real thing, like a Bigfoot, you know, and I use that term, you know, loosely, real or not real, who knows. But the reason he's called Bigfoot is because, you know, they're leaving the big footprints. So they call him Bigfoot. If he's real, that's not really his name. He's probably something else. He could be Jim or something, for all we know. So he's called King Cryptid, not because he refers to himself as a king or sees himself as king of the cryptids, but because when people have seen him, they kind of describe him in that way. He's a cryptid, he's a creature, he's unknown, and he has this silhouette, this kingly-looking silhouette. He's a creature also that flies, so when he gets in front of like a full moon and leaves a silhouetted impression, you kind of see like that cape and like this little jaggedy crown of bone. So that name kind of stuck with him in the realm of the story because of the fact that when witnesses would spot him out, it just caught, and the name caught on. And he's been around for a very long time. This character is like a 500-year-old cursed immortal. But to people, he's a creature of some kind. He's a beast of some kind. So when they've seen him, the name has stuck. It was created a long time ago, that name, and it's just stuck. So the name stuck with me as well, because when I revisited it, there was nothing else. I thought, you know what, let's just go with it. I still kind of like it. It's been a while. I'm coming up with more stuff for the character. We'll go with it. And so I started sketching out what I saw when I thought of the name and when I thought of if I were to see this character exist in the world. And it's very similar to what he looks like now. He's got that jaggedy crown of bone. He's kind of got like this bone shoulder piece, and then this like leathery bat wing looking cape thing. And he's got these 3 fingers with all like, these big claw talon looking fingers, and then he's got 2 large toes with like these clawed things as well. And he's a furry character. He's got really, you know, long hair, a big giant beard, and he's covered in fur. So he is definitely a creature to look at him. If you were to see him in real life, he's 7 feet tall, he's 400 pounds. It'd be a big, intimidating, scary creature. But the character is a hero. The character didn't start out that way, though. The character had a long history before getting to that point. But he's been around for a while, like I said. So thinking of it in terms of the story that I needed to tell, it really just felt like this is a story that a lot of the times I sit there, I think about what kind of story do I want to tell? What's the point? What's the objective of the story? Where does it end up? How does it start? The different story beats. This is an ongoing series. It's episodic. So if you're a fan of the storytelling style of like Thundercats or Batman the Animated Series, this is far more closer to that than it would be to something like I don't know, like Game of Thrones, where it's this linear progression of constantly, moving along with the plot, very plot driven kind of a thing. This is all about the character and the world of the character and all the other different elements therein. So thinking about it in terms of that, it wasn't like here's a start point and here's an end point. I want to make sure I tell these kinds of things that happen, and then that's it. The story's done. Every single story is a new experience. So it was more to me about defining the character and the world that they were in. And I really felt like I had to tell this story. I absolutely just have to, because it's everything that encompasses what I love about everything I've ever loved. It's everything I ever loved about comics. It's everything I ever loved about the paranormal, about anything that was a mystery or an unknown thing. There's elements of like secret societies in this. There's UFO extraterrestrials. There's monsters. There's all kinds of different things. Anything that's unexplained in a way. I've always been interested in that stuff. And as a storyteller, when I made The Chair, it's a death row psychological thriller. So I knew what I wanted to tell. I knew the ending before I knew the beginning. I knew the kind of story I wanted to tell. There was going to be kind of like a character study of two characters that come from the same place and end up, even though they go down completely different paths in life, they end up in the same place too. So I knew I kind of wanted these sort of elements. I knew I wanted a kind of like a Twilight Zone-y kind of feel to it. There was none of that with King Cryptid. Everything with King Cryptid is literally, it's a compulsion. And that's what I mean too by it's a story that you need to tell. You have something to say, you're interested in things. If we all think about it, we know the kind of stuff that we've always been into. We know the stuff that we've always been drawn to. There's a certain guttural feeling. You see, and a lot of things nowadays try to bleed it out of you. To me, it's instinct. So you see a certain piece of art, and you're drawn to it, or you're repelled by it. Sometimes there's no reason why. It just is. It's almost irrational. Many people would say it's irrational, and they want you to quantify it. But sometimes you can't quantify it. It's kind of almost like falling in love. Sometimes, you just fall in love and you just love everything about this person, and you can't really quantify that. You can write things down of, oh, well, I like this about them, I like that about them. But you like those things about a lot of people. How did you fall in love with this person? And sometimes you're just like, I don't know, I just did. And then sometimes there's people you meet and you just don't like them. I'm sure there's probably somebody that watches this right now and is like, that guy, I don't like, he just shut up. I don't like him at all. So I'm like, you can't help, but that's what happens. And it's this way too. It's the same way for me with storytelling in terms of there's certain things I'm just drawn to. And I can quantify it and explain it and use fancy words and give some critical thinking behind it. And, but that ruins the fun out of a lot of it, to kind of batter it to death with the whole, well, this is the reason I love it, and this is the reason I don't. They beat it out of you in art school, and in the real world, they beat it out of you with a lot of different things too, to try to force you to maybe like things you don't, and maybe to not like things that you do. But if we actually all stay true to ourselves and we listen to our hearts and our instinct and that kind of force, you'll start to find that you and everyone else around you has at least one really good story to tell. One unique, really good story. Some people have more than one, but everyone's got at least one. But you got to really think about it, and you got to be introspective about it, and you got to think, what really matters to me? What really matters to me in terms of what do I feel that I need to tell, that I need to get this out of me? And now if you're a creative person with comic books or whatever, you can tell that story through a comic. And there's ways to do it with other medium and all that kind of stuff, but comic books is the thing I love, and that's how I'm telling my story. But this is that story. This is that story where I feel compelled to tell it. I feel like this is not, I don't want to say it's important to tell it, but it's important to me to tell it. And I hope that it entertains people. I hope they get something out of it. Comic books and storytelling in general did a lot for me when I was growing up in particular. I still love storytelling, obviously. I find that storytelling transcends generations. It transcends cultures. It transcends all of us. It doesn't matter who or what you are or whatever it is. A great story has the ability to tap into the human condition on some level that manages to speak to a wide variety of people and unite people. And conversely, stories can also be used to divide people too. So this whole thing with storytelling to me was very important. It was very powerful in my life. And if some of the stories I'm telling, if they end up impacting anybody in that way, great. But for the most part, if it just takes you away from your day and puts you into the world of the comic or the characters, then that's great. I'm more than happy to do that. But yeah, that's what I really want to see, not just out of myself, but I want to see that out of more creators too. Sitting there and really taking the time to think, don't just sit there and think about, okay, I want to tell this because I want to sell that story and I want to make this story and I want to do that. Really sit there and think, if I were to be gone from the world, but my works would last forever, because they do, what would I want people to remember? What would I want them and say, that is the essential, whatever it may be, that's the essential Marshall Lee comic book story. That you got to read that. That's important. He put that out. It really hit me. And for every creator out there to do that, whatever it may be, it doesn't need to be some big emotional piece. It doesn't need to be something that's big, deep, and philosophical. It just needs to be something that is completely and entirely and utterly you, but as in a comic. And if you're able to do that and distill that and put that on paper and make that story, you have something really special. You have something that no one else could ever do. No one else could ever make that story. That is your story. And like I said, I think everyone has at least one great story in them, whether they're a comic creator or not, or whatever it may be. If they were to sit there and think about it, even if it was kind of biographical in some way, I think they have a great story to tell. Everyone has one. But this story, King Cryptid, to me, and that's why I feel very, very confident in the fact that when I say I'm going to work on this for the rest of my life, I truly mean it. I'm going to work on this for the rest of my life. So right now it's going to be the first 4 issues, and every single year we're going to put out 4 issues to 5 issues or so. I'm already got about 25 to 30 issues outlined. I've got about 60 to 70 with just the plot elements in terms of, I kind of want to introduce this to it, or that character, or this happens, or whatever to the character. And if I just have to think of whatever else that came into my mind and I wrote it down, I've got about 100 stories. Every single time I create one story and start fleshing it out, 2 more ideas pop up. So it's that kind of a thing where I really could keep doing this for as long as humanly possible. But that's what I want to see from everybody, and that's what I'm going to try to do as best as I possibly can.
Wow, that's really cool. And again, as I think about it, like, I feel like I'm finding my way to that kind of story. And I think it has to do with kind of almost investigating what, for me at least, what first inspired me. And it's just interesting because, like, when I first started getting into comics, it was, before Image, but the Image creators, they were my big inspiration. That's just when I happened to find my way into a comic shop, and those comics were on the shelf, and it's what inspired me. And then it took many years before I finally made my first comic. And when I did kind of put, like, okay, I'm into hip hop and I'm into, like, superhero type stuff, so I'm gonna make some character that brings all that together. And that's when I created my Glyph character. And I made 3 mini comics with that. And then since then, I've made, like, various mini comics just exploring different things. And I'm sitting there and I'm thinking, like, after I'm hearing you say this, I'm like, man, are those stories that I need to tell, or they're just like, oh, there's this anthology coming up that I can be a part of, so let me make something up. That's kind of what's ended up happening. Um, and I'm like, man, but I do, like, I when I hear you talk about this, I'm like, this is, like, really cool, because it seems like you said, you can keep going with this idea. And I mean, you just think about like cryptids and stuff. Like there's just so many places you can go with that. I'm like, man, I want to find some kind of idea. Like to me, it reminds me of like almost like Savage Dragon. You know, I feel like, I mean, obviously there's a lot of creator owned stuff, but I think of Savage Dragon because, you know, Eric Larson has been like invested in that story for so long now, and it's just one of those those like characters where he kind of, I felt like he put all the things in it. Like it's almost like he made like 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 a set of ingredients that is like the Eric Larson ingredients, and now I can make, you know, cake with these, like this set of ingredients. I can make, you know, a really nice juicy hamburger, like depending on like how I change it up and mix it up, you know, add one ingredient, take another out. But it's like there's something about it, but this is like Eric Larson's like brand or whatever. And same thing with some other creators. A lot of, I think it's kind of funny because you know, in the past it was Marvel and DC, you know, and then before that there was other things, but like it wasn't so much creator based, creator owned as many things. Like I wonder what would happen like if there was more of that, because you know you get all these parts of stories, or people who do runs, and I guess you can say like, okay, Jack Kirby, you know, he created like characters that lasted for a long time, and he worked on those characters for a decent amount of time. Steve Ditko, Spider-Man, like, and we've seen glimpses of it, but now I feel like that there's more freedom for creator owned ventures. Man, like I feel like this is gonna happen, I hope, more often, you know. And when I see what you're doing, and you know, even stuff coming from Alterna, you know, with like Blood Realm, for instance, or like, you know, uh Wolf and Batsy is one that I really like
Yeah,
lately.
yeah.
You know, and just some of these others, like it's like, oh man, like there have been plenty of people in the past. You think of like Cerebus, and like there are like some people who have kind of done this thing, but it's like finding, it's like you can't, like you said, you can't like just like, all right, what is a story that you need to tell? What are all the elements? Let's line it up in a row and try to construct something out of these principles. It does have to be like, I don't know, like you said, I like that you said the word compulsion. It has to be almost like a compulsion. And I don't know. I'm trying to find my way.
Well, the thing is too is that I don't want to dismiss that every single step you take to lead you to where you are now, you needed to take, because that's 100% true. So 10 years ago, even though I've loved all this stuff the whole time, 10 years ago I wouldn't have had this idea. 10 years ago I would have, you know, felt like I don't really know how to tell that kind of story yet. I wouldn't have been confident enough to do that. So you are led down a certain road based on all the different things that you do. So when you're talking about getting involved in like an anthology, or creating your own characters and starting off telling a story that you feel kind of comfortable telling, or all these other things, you're cutting your teeth. So you're learning your way on how to tell a story, on what you need to do, whether you're a writer, an artist, or both, or whatever it may be. You're doing all these things that build up towards something. It's not like you're throwing away your time, or you're wasting it, or whatever it may be, or you're telling things that are completely you shouldn't tell them, because you know these aren't things that you're absolutely and utterly obsessed with. You don't get there until you start working on those types of things. So everyone, when you're starting off, you're going to be doing all this stuff to learn, to grow, to be a better craftsman, whatever it may be. So I don't want to tell anybody, you know, well, you should always just sit there and you're just starting off, and just tell the absolute story that you absolutely want to tell, and you want to get that out there. If you want to start working on stuff, and start getting used to writing and drawing and whatever it may be, I mean, it takes a while to get to do that. I've been doing this for 16 years. So it took 16 years of good and bad to get this character out. It took 16 years of life experiences to get this character and this story out. The only thing that I'm basically saying in terms of telling the story that you really need to tell is to stay true to who you are as a storyteller. Stay true to the elements and the things and the subject matters that really interest you. Forcing yourself out of the box to work on certain things is great, because it'll help you to distill everything back into the thing that you really love working on. But at the end of the day, when it comes time to actually get that project out, if you just spend your whole career, let's say, just doing things and kind of chasing the audience all the time, if you're doing things and you're constantly trying to impress the publisher, if you're doing things and you're constantly trying to work for the corporate company, and meanwhile all the time you're kind of suppressing, because everybody does this. They have these great ideas already. So this isn't anything that I'm necessarily saying that should be revelatory to anyone. Everyone from top to bottom has these great ideas of, well, if I had the perfect condition, the perfect timing, the budget, whatever it may be, this is the story I would make. But I'm going to put that and kind of shelf that for now. But don't shelf it for too long. And I think sometimes there's people that do that, and it's unfortunate. And then that window of opportunity will pass. And so the timing really is everything. But when there's a story out there that you need to tell, and it's really kind of taking over and percolating, and you're building on it, start to shift your priorities. Start to shift your priorities towards that. And then, like I said before with Alterna, I want to see stories from people that mean something to them. That this is not an outlet necessarily just for them to get a story out there and then just think, yeah, well, that was a good story, on to the next one. But these are characters they care about. This is a story that they care about. There is something here that is unique to how they want to tell from their perspective, and tell it through these characters. And then these characters have multi-perspectives, because that's what makes an interesting story too. If every single character in the story has the same perspective, it's the most boring thing you've ever read. So you're not going to have any conflict. You're not going to have any growth. It's just going to be a bunch of characters like, yeah, I'm just like you. Oh, you're just like me. I'm just like you. The whole thing is just going to be one big gigantic bore. They all think the same, and they all talk about the same stuff, and they all behave the same, and everyone's the hero. And then, you're writing yourself into a corner. So you need that conflict, but you need this conflict that feels real. So you need to build up your villains in just as realistic of a way as you build up your hero. So you have to tackle that kind of thing from different perspectives. And I think a lot of the time nowadays we see a lot of storytelling that's not really encouraged anymore so much. We see a lot of people, unfortunately, that prescribe certain things and say, well, if you're a writer and you're writing this kind of a character and you're writing them a little too well, and they have, this morality that's questionable or whatever it may be, does that mean that you prescribe to those beliefs or to the way that character behaves? And I don't know when we started turning this way. I guess we've always kind of been this way in certain ways in terms of human beings, where we think, creatively through fiction, there must be some kind of sliver of the truth there, that this must be how you feel about certain things. But the truth is that it's just called, you can play pretend really, really well. And you can get into the mindset of these characters, just study the psychology, that kind of a thing, and create a character that's pretty well fleshed out. But it's all these sort of stories where we see things that are created nowadays, especially in the corporate world, not so much the independent world, but more the corporate world, where you're using someone else's toys. You're in their sandbox. You're snapping the head off of this one toy, putting it on the head of the other, and saying it's new. And it doesn't necessarily mean that's new or good. It might be original. It might be the first time they've ever done that, but it doesn't maybe mean that they should have done that. So you get all these sort of things in that world where they're kind of running dry on a lot of ideas. I think everybody can kind of see that nowadays, where there's so many reboots and remakes and, regurgitated versions of characters. And, if this character's getting kind of stale, just slap a new coat of paint on them and paint them whatever different anything you want to paint them. It's a costume change now is basically what you can dwindle down to, like race, gender, sexuality, whatever. And that's unfortunate, because those should be all hard hitting to the core of the character elements. So if you have characters where, and this is a very popular thing to say nowadays, where if it's a different gender or a race or a sexuality, and you would say, oh, well, my character, that doesn't really matter too much. Why? Why doesn't that matter too much? That should matter a lot. If they're a religious character, it should matter a lot. Put that into their characterization. I used to love, I still do love, but not the current modern interpretations of Nightcrawler was one of my favorite characters, and I loved his interactions with Wolverine, who Wolverine comes across as like this kind of atheist almost, because he doesn't believe in God because so many awful things he's seen and all this kind of stuff. And Nightcrawler is a man of faith, and to see them interact was always very, very not entertaining, but you get something from it. There's something deep there. There's some kind of, seeing these two, you would think they'd be opposites, but they were close friends. And to see them kind of have that interaction was very interesting and if anything, kind of heartwarming in a way. And they would learn from each other different things, and all kinds of characters that they'd be different. They would learn from each other, and they wouldn't become like each other, but they would learn. So to see that kind of element play through, and say that this is an important element to them, this shapes who they are. Make it that way. Make it that these things shape who these characters are. Create these interesting and compelling characters. You don't have to just say, oh, well, we're doing it because I guess we need representation. Do it, no, because it'll make a great story, and come up with a way to make it a great story and a great character and really flesh it out and make it this integral, important part of this character. I think that's what most people honestly complain about. I think if you cut through the bullshit with the complaints and see the superficial people that, they're complaining about the character getting changed, what they're really complaining about is the character got worse. And the character is no longer this fully fleshed out great character. The character is this one-dimensional cookie cutter bullshit character that is a corporate puppet. And it meant something to them. And now you've changed this like a real person, because if anything, you love these characters because you're emotionally invested in these characters. For these companies to kind of do that, or any creator to kind of do that, they're kind of coming along and saying, well, it doesn't matter that you care about this character. They're not real. Don't you know they're not real? Well, as soon as you do that, you might as well just have that person go, okay, it's all not real. All doesn't matter. See ya. I'm going to go over somewhere else where I am appreciated, and my time and energy and money and emotional investment is appreciated as well. It's why people wear like the jersey of a sports team, or why people wear the shirt of a character they love, or why they buy a statue of the character, or, as opposed to something that they don't know anything about. And they might think it looks cool, but it doesn't mean anything to them. When it starts to mean something to them, then they're invested in it. So to look at that and say that you don't understand why people are interested in this character and why they care so much is to actually say that you don't know what the hell this character is about. So you see a lot of the time that happens in corporations with these characters that they don't really own. They didn't create them. They're hiring people to come in there and kind of do whatever they can to make some money out of these make-believe things, and hope that the fans of these make-believe things will still purchase the make-believe stories of this character that now is completely unrecognizable to them. But that's what I love so much about independent creators and creator-owned properties, is because a lot of the time, if not all the time, someone that's creating those things is invested in it emotionally. So right off the bat, you have this person who's there. They've been living with this character longer than any other person. They've been knowing what this character is about. They created this character. They're almost like a parent more than a creator. This is like their child, their baby. And so they care so much about it. Now, does that mean every single creator-owned story is fantastic and terrific and amazing or whatever? It doesn't really mean that. But it does mean that there is a lot of heart that's there. And I honestly argue that there's a lot of heart that's there, far more than you see a lot of the heart that's there at corporate characters, no matter how much someone would want to tell you that there is. Unless, of course, maybe if it was the person that actually created that character at that corporation, maybe they do really care about it. And one day they're going to see that the corporation does things to that character in ways that they just didn't think that was going to happen, and maybe they get their heart ripped out. I mean, we've seen certainly a lot of those stories in the comic industry. So as we see this generation of creators who pretty much created everything we know about comics start to unfortunately pass away and die out, At the corporate level, we're seeing a lot of creators who are taking over, and they're not really carrying the torch. But I think on the independent level, we're seeing a lot of creators that are spiritually carrying the torch. So even though they're not working on those characters, they're working on their own characters. They're inspired by those creators. They're inspired by the characters and the stories that they loved. And even though it might take some time, because a lot of these creators are kind of up and coming and they're new to certain mechanics of storytelling, especially through comics or whatever it may be, I think give it 5 or 10 years from now, we're going to see a whole nother golden age of comic books through that kind of storytelling. I think we're starting to see a little bit of it build up. But it's only going to get better and better because the walls are starting to come down that separate creator and publisher from reader. A lot of the distribution systems are starting to almost become obsolete because you can go directly to the reader. You can engage, you can talk to them, you can not just verbalize your ideas or show them something, but you can also interact with them in a way that almost in some way they're a part of the storytelling process too. So what I mean by that is, like with King Cryptid, it's an ongoing story and there's going to be so many characters throughout. If there's someone that's like, Pete, I'm really loving this character, you haven't had a story with them in like a year or two, are they coming back? And if I start to get a lot of people talking about that, I start to think maybe I'll bring this character back and let's do another story. The readers seem to really love it. So you have this kind of engagement where you start to not necessarily have fan service at play, even though I think that term has really gotten a bad rep over the years, because what's so bad about making sure that the fans and the readers are happy? But I think you get this creative process where you can kind of have people involved that lets you know the things they love or maybe don't love about what's occurring within the story or the comic, and you can, as a creator, play to those different beats. So if they're really loving certain characters and they're really attached, you think, well, do I want to do certain things to this character that's going to upset the reader? Or do I want to keep on going down a certain path that makes them, happy about what's going on with this character? So creatively, you can look at different things and realize, if you do this thing to this character, let's say it's a character everyone loves, and you kill him off just because you're simply like, wouldn't that make it so much more interesting? Maybe. But are you doing it just to make it more interesting for you or to make it more interesting for them? Because there's a lot of other things you can do to a character other than kill it that are interesting with that character. So I find a lot of the times too, death in comics or any kind of story, when they're like, well, it makes it really interesting and you keep the audience on their toes because anyone can die at any moment. Like, that's the only thing you can do to your character and your story to make your story interesting. That's kind of like, maybe you're not that strong of a storyteller. If that's your kind of, you lean back and go, well, when the chips are down, I got that ace up my sleeve, which is kill everyone's favorite character. Which is also like, well, then why are they going to read or pay attention to the story anymore? So there's all kinds of things at play. I think we see it a lot of the time in comics. I think we've seen it in different stories throughout the years where you see certain creators do certain things and you're just like, you could have done a lot of different things. You didn't really need to do that. So with this kind of story, I could pay attention to the audience, and the way that the thing is now is that we can engage with the audience directly so much easier than before. You don't have to sift through a massive pile of letters or whatever it may be, the way it used to be with like comic book letter pages. You can go to social media, you can get your email in, you can even look at the way things are going on a crowdfunder. And depending what it is the audience is wanting to support or what they're into, you can gauge what their interest is at certain levels. So it's an experience unlike anything ever before in comics. I hate to say it's like revolutionary, but it really feels revolutionary. It feels like this is the best time ever to be an independent creator and an independent comic book reader. It's great, and I can't wait to see the future of it for everybody, not just myself.
Yeah, totally. And a lot of stuff you were saying in there too is like, you were talking about kind of, it like the painting a character, giving them a new costume, changing their gender, all these different things, and it's like, the thing is like, it almost feels like, okay, like, because you'll hear a lot of people criticize, oh, back in the 90s they had these, these foil covers and this gimmick and that gimmick to sell comics. Things were bad. They had multiple now they talk about multiple covers a lot and stuff like that. But just the same way, in your storytelling could be a gimmick. Oh, this in this comic we're representing every, ethnicity and every gender and all that stuff. And
And
it's
that's
like,
so much worse. I'd rather be sold a foil cover or a glow in the dark cover for an extra buck and have it be, collector's edition all over the damn thing than actually turn characters and turn them into gimmicks based on saying, and this is the strange part too, is you're basically saying that, well, because this character is this way, anyone who is like this character will like this character. That's racist. That's inherently racist to say that people who look, or just bigoted in general, is to say that people who look like this or are of this sexuality or of this gender or whatever it may be, if we put this character that's like that, that's like this audience we're trying to target, we'll get all of that audience's money. Why? Because do you think they all think the same? That's bigoted.
yeah,
That's
yeah,
literally the foundation of bigotry, is to say that people who look or whatever, they're all the same. They think the same, they act the same, they do everything the same, and they'll buy the books because we put them there. That's insane. How about you just make a good character, and you can make him as different as you want. We've had different characters of all kinds, all walks of life and every shape and size and ethnicity and sexuality in comics and stories for forever. We're not talking about like this is the 30s. And you're doing this groundbreaking, like, holy smokes, this is kind of crazy. This is 2022, and this is groundbreaking. It should be a given. Diversity should just be a given. So to say that this is some kind of a marketing thing or whatever it is, or this is a representation, it's such bullshit. It's such disingenuous bullshit from a lot of these corporations that want your money. That's all it is. They want your money, and they're coming up with ways to try to get your money. And they're doing it in a way that says if we push a character out that's like this, everyone who's like this will buy it. That's bullshit. Just make a really great character, and you could still make him as different as you want. I don't give a crap what the hell it is. I mean, you could make every character gay or reverse the gender or whatever you want to do, and you can still tell a compelling and great story with great creators involved in great writing. You could still do that. You just have to figure out how to tell it with great characters and great characterizations and emphasizing their personalities, their experiences, their histories, whatever it may be, and move forward like that.
well, that's the thing too, is like, it's not even about all that, like the gender and the race. It's like, the thing is like, that's kind of the cool thing that's amazing about story. So say you do want equality or whatever it is that, is the thing that you really care about. And it's like, if it's a gender thing or whatever, like, or even a political thing, like, say I'm a Republican, tell me a Democrat. Like, I would love to listen to a story that almost convinces me to be a Democrat. Like, the story is already so like powerful. Like, it creates like empathy. Like, tell me a good story, even if it's like,
Yeah.
for instance, like, I've been very public. I'm a Christian. Okay. So like, tell me a story from an atheist perspective that's also, fair, that shows kind of both sides, but like, tell me a story about that and show me some things that maybe I didn't think about before. And to me personally, story has been powerful in my life. There's been many times where I've gone into a story thinking one thing and come out considering something totally different that I didn't think before, and that's like why story's so awesome. So if you're gonna do that, do it with story. Like, make the story actually good.
Yeah, and the same thing. It's having these compelling characters that you are telling their perspective and offering multiple perspectives, and you're having these characters interact. If you're doing something where every character has the same perspective, and the reader is essentially the only one who may have the different perspective, that's when you're not creating a story anymore. You're creating propaganda. That's when now you're telling a story that's supposed to convert the reader. That shouldn't be the point of storytelling, is to convert the reader. Even the conversion of a reader, like you had said, It may occur through offering the different viewpoints and the different, pros and cons in a situation, the different conflict, and seeing how that conflict rides out. But the change that occurs changes with the character. It doesn't change. You're not expecting the reader to change. You're writing the story saying, hopefully this changes all the viewpoints of the reader. Any creator that sets out to do that kind of a thing, to me, you failed before you began. All of that kind of stuff should be, it should be very, it's a very, very light touch in terms of making sure that, no, you have characters interacting with each other. You might have characters set up as an analog for what you might view as like there's someone reading this or whatever. But are you castigating that character? Are you putting that character down? Or does that character have a chance to also speak their viewpoint and their ground that's just as valid? And maybe to both sides, which is the ideal here, whenever you have characters that don't see eye to eye, like I talked about Wolverine and Nightcrawler, you have characters kind of walking away, kind of learning a bit of each other. And that's honestly how a lot of the times the reader will learn a little bit about themselves, even because you see this argument. There's people that like to watch like debates and things like that, or political or otherwise, and you get to see the arguments. You get to see people lay out their perspective based on hopefully their experiences and facts and all these other things laid out, and see if they're making a compelling argument or not. And you as the viewer get to sit back and see who do you side with. And maybe sometimes, or if not most of the time, if both of them are good at it, you can draw a little bit from both. And that's honestly what it's like to be a reader, and you're seeing the conflict play out. Even with villains, you can have these villains and these heroes, and there's this conflict here, and there's something compelling about it. Let's say it's more than just a cookie cutter surface level. The villain did something bad, the hero stopping them from doing something bad. But there's more to it than that, and there's a lot of subtext, and there's history with the villain. There's motivations involved. You can see the villain why that they're doing the things that they're doing, and also you can see why the hero must do what they do. Those are kind of the most interesting sort of stories. And it's easy to dwindle it down to antagonist and protagonist, but a lot of the times the stories, sometimes there's moral ambiguity. So when you're talking about it from that viewpoint and you look at it that way, as a reader, it's not just entertaining, but you can get something out of it that makes you think. Even if it doesn't change your mind about anything, or that's not the point. It makes you think, it stays with you. And these stories hit you, and that's where the emotion gets involved. But if you have these kinds of stories, like I said, where it's just, these characters, there is no real conflict. It's very black and white. There's next to no shades of gray. And you end up starting to feel like they're not really fighting in this issue. There's no conflict here, which means that they're fighting with me. They're fighting with me, the reader. I'm the one that they're arguing with.
I'm out of reading this book with a black eye.
Yeah, so it kind of feels like that's a really strange way to want to be entertained, is that you're getting like scolded the whole time by the creator using the characters as an avatar for however they feel about whatever. And instead of and that's often, I think, how we see a lot of these kinds of books, that you want to have a strong female, so you put down the male. Why? You don't need to do that. You could just have a strong female doing strong, things, courageous things, acts of heroism, sacrifice, the same way that you would characterize a male's heroism. A male hero, if all they did was put down women the entire time, I think a lot of people would kind of be like, all right, that's if it's not supposed to be for humor and to play it up as like, oh, this character is kind of a jerk. Like I think of a character like a Zap Brannigan from Futurama, kind of like that chauvinist character. It's funny, but it's funny because it's kind of like, we get it. It's kind of wrong. But it's not sitting there with the character that's just constantly putting someone else down to be a hero. So it's kind of strange to see a lot of storytelling set up in that way, that it's this, I am greater than, you are less than, and so that makes me better. The shoes in the other foot, you look at that and go, that's wrong. It's wrong when they do it too. So the double standard in storytelling, and in modern storytelling in particular, I think is kind of disappointing and a little disturbing to see. But that's not what I like to see at stories. That's not how I'm telling my story. There's a lot to learn. The character of King Cryptid is a 500-year-old character, and he's seen a lot. He's been through a lot, and even he knows. And I think, I believe it might be a Socrates quote about, wisdom is basically defined by knowing what you don't know, and kind of accepting it, and kind of basically being like, yeah, there's a lot of stuff I don't know. And that's more about what wisdom is the perspective to say, it's not that I know everything. It's like, goodness, I don't know much about anything. And the more you know, the less you know. You keep on having this endless discovery. And to be in that state is truly to have a sense of wisdom, because that's what prevents you from having these dramatic leaps forward in your reactions and things that will let emotion overtake your logic. And we're human beings, so we're still going to have times where emotion overtakes us and logic becomes secondary, and we get irrational. But there's for the most part, the hopefully not older you get, because sometimes people don't get wise with age, but the more experienced you get, generally the more perspective you gain. So the more that you tend to not go down those flights of irrational emotion. But it's that kind of thing with the character. I'm thinking about it in the lens of, okay, this character's around for a while. He's seen a lot of loss. He's lost a lot of people that he's cared about, a lot of cryptid creatures he's cared about. He knows the capacity of good and evil. So he knows not necessarily to take everything at face value, but he also knows not to fully trust it either. So there's a lot of different things with King Cryptid where, even though he's a monster, he's a creature, he's this thing at this point, he's very much human, and he used to be human. So it's that kind of thing where he still maintains his humanity a bit because of basically the first 100 years of his curse. He was this ravenous killing beast, just kind of killed and fed off of anything and everything, human, animal, whatever. And then he met a shaman that recognized him through the stories and the legends, and recognized this must be this person. And he helped him out and gave him this enchanted moonstone. And the moonstone basically, it brings out his inner humanity. It psychically brings out who he truly is and subsides what this curse has done to him. So the whole time, those 100 years or so, where he was just in this state and he was cursed to be this awful killing beast, he knew what was going on. He's just powerless to stop any of it. So the whole time he's doing these horrible things. I mean, imagine doing like some of the most horrible things you can imagine doing for 100 years, and the whole time you're just dying inside, knowing that you can't do a damn thing about it, because physically your body is compelled to do these horrible things. Yeah. And now you finally get your inner self restored. He's on essentially a path of redemption. He doesn't know how he can die. He believes he can die. He can get hurt. He's been severely hurt, but he doesn't understand whether or not he can truly die or be gravely injured. So it's the kind of thing where he feels like maybe that's part of the curse, is that he can be to the brink of death and still find some way he recovers. He has a healing factor, and that he eventually is brought back, and he, or maybe he's resurrected or whatever it is. He has no idea. But all he knows is that it's been 500 years. He's been through hell and back, and he still hasn't died. So he feels like he's on a path of redemption to make up for the horrible things that he had done, even though he was not really responsible for doing the awful things that he had done. He was powerless to stop it. It was just part of what had happened with the curse. But that moonstone, it brings out his inner humanity. And his inner humanity, he's a very compassionate person, but he's also someone who you wouldn't want to necessarily poke the bear too much. Because King Cryptid will kill you. He is not a character that's not, got this, there's a line and I must not cross it. I will never kill. Being 500 or so years old, he's well aware of what that line is, and sometimes it does need to be crossed in certain circumstances. So it's not one of those things of he's going to wantonly kill anyone or whatever, but it's a last resort. If he feels like he must, then he will. But it's that kind of thing where you're dealing with this sort of character. And then every single issue, even though it's kind of like a monster of the issue kind of thing, And like on TV shows, it used to be Monster of the Week. Um, it's not just King Cryptid. Here's a monster. He beats the crap out of him. The end. Next week he beats the crap out of some other monster. The end. There's a lot to it with these monsters as well. They have their own backstories. We learn a bit about them. Some of them are legendary cryptids that have always been. Some of them are genetic experiments that have been tragically altered to be this way. Some of them are reluctantly doing bad things. Some of them love to do bad things. Some of them are heroic as well. And then there's also human beings in there. There's cryptozoologists involved. There's secret societies. There's there's something called Necro, which is the New England Cryptid Research Organization. And I've named it that because of the fact that a lot of the time we have these government institutions that love to name their acronyms that add up into something that seems ominous. And you're like, you could have named it anything. Are you not aware that when you spell that all out, it looks kind of strange? So we have the New England Cryptid Research Organization, acronym of Necro. That it starts to make you think like, that seems a little odd, and it's because the New England Cryptid Research Organization is kind of odd. How odd, we dive into those depths a bit with the series. By the time we get to like issue like 30, we're talking about it gets weird, and then it takes the reader for a whole different spin down a whole nother path. So the whole time, if you pay attention to this and you remember it, 10 or 15 years from now, when issue 30 comes out, you're going to think like, he kind of said that on that Marsh Makes Comics stream. So there's all these different layers to the story, to the characters involved, to the world involved. And we start layering them all issue by issue. A lot of the time we see in modern comics, it's like right for the trade. So it'll be like, 6 issues, and then it's all like this story arc, and then it gets put into the trade. There's none of that in King Cryptid. There's a couple of story arcs where it'll be like a 3-parter, and we'll say it right on the front cover, part 1 of 3, 2 of 3, etc. But for the most part, I'd say 95% of the issues are self-contained, and there's a story arc element that connects all of them. And we'll have like editor's notes that reference previous issues when there's certain plot points. So if you missed a certain issue and you got to get a refresher, or you're just jumping onto the series for the first time, and something's mentioned and you're like, oh, what's that all about? It'll mention what issue to go seek out, and all that good stuff that was so fun about comics. King Cryptid, there's thought bubbles, so you get that whole thing, that whole experience of that inner monologue of characters that gives you some insight into how they feel about a situation, where maybe sometimes they're saying one thing but they're thinking the other. That I always love that about comics, and that kind of got out of fashion for a while, and there was a lot of just this the thoughts through captions, and then the captions were no longer captions. They weren't these fun literary narratives. They were now just the thoughts of the character. And it was very difficult to maintain that kind of fun level of like, here was their thoughts and then here's what they were saying, or all these kinds of things. We have that now though in King Cryptid. So if you've loved comics for a while, this is a series I think you're really going to enjoy. If you like the paranormal, you like mystery and that kind of stuff, I think you're going to enjoy it as well. But I try to sprinkle stuff throughout that really gives a deeper sense of meaning for the characters, their histories, their story as well. And it's not just literally, there's some cool monsters and they beat each other's brains out. There's a lot of action and adventure to the story, but there's a lot of heart there as well.
Yeah. No, I can tell that from some of the things you've described, and I love that you are incorporating thought bubbles, because I like that. I remember reading comics with that, and always wondered what kind of happened to them. I think maybe like Frank Miller happened to him. I don't know, but that being said, one of the things like that struck me when you were first kind of describing is like, you kind of came up with like, you just kind of had this name in your head, the King Cryptid. This is, and then like you had a couple like little ideas, but like I was just curious, like, because to me, like I've had ideas like that in my head before, like a character or a thing like that. But then I've actually had trouble like figuring out like I don't get like, what is this? I'm creating this character. I don't even know what this character is about. Like, how did you create or come up with like the actual story to it, the characterization of it, and how it's just interesting to go from, because people do that, they'll just draw characters and they'll come up with a cool design, and then they'll make the comic around that. That's one way of doing it, and I think I could do that, but at the same time I'm like, how do you get there, like from point A to point B with that?
Yeah, I guess it's with King Cryptid, it was a lot about the story kind of was speaking through me. So it's that kind of thing where you've got the character, you've got the name, you've got all these little like things trickle in. At least this is how it works for me. I can't say that this is how it works for anybody else, but things were trickling in over time. I knew, like I said, the groundwork was I knew I wanted to tell a story that had monsters in it, creatures, monsters, the unknown, that kind of stuff. I wanted to tell some kind of supernatural, paranormal story set in the real world, but obviously it's a world that's like our own, not exactly our own. So there's places geographically that are like the whole place. The story takes place largely in the White Mountains, New Hampshire, but it also takes place in all kinds of other areas too. But that's King Cryptid's base of operations, I guess you could say, his cave lair in the White Mountains of New Hampshire. So I knew I wanted to kind of set it in that kind of in a way, in terms of the world, that aspect of it, and that it wasn't going to be a fantasy world, and it wasn't going to be a character also that had no ties to humanity, that it was like 100% supernatural. I wanted to make it that this was a human being and something happened to them, because to me, every character, if not honestly every single person on the planet, in realistic terms, we are all children of trauma. So we were all created, every single way we think, every single thing we do stems from some trauma that we have been through. Sometimes it's a big trauma. Sometimes there's 100 little traumas. For most people, it's 100 little traumas. And every single thing shapes the way you view life. So it's like you're a river running down, and then every single piece of trauma is like that little, here's a fork, here's a rock, here's this little thing that sends you down a different path. But you keep on going. Hopefully you keep on going until you get to the end. And then, so because of that trauma, I think, what defines a hero and a villain most of the time is how they deal with trauma. So a villain will go through trauma and all of a sudden say, well, I want the world to feel my pain. So it's a very revenge-driven kind of thing. But the hero will often go through trauma and try their best to make sure other people don't go through that same pain. Now, you can tell a compelling story sometime where some heroes turn into villains by trying too much, so they start to try to control too much. But if the hero will stay a hero, they do not try to control necessarily the life of others. They try to just be there to protect and make sure that they don't go through the same pain. The unfortunate path of the hero is that by taking that path, you will ensure you will always go through pain, because you cannot do everything for everyone every time. So heroes will go through all kinds of different hell, and it all tests and everything else, is just much like we all do in life. And they're trying to make their own little corner of the world as good as it possibly can be. And I think that's very relatable. I think that's what we all try to do. And King Cryptid's the same way. He's trying to do what he can in his own little corner of the world, much like we all do day in and day out. You give it your best and hope for the best. So that's how I kind of start with a lot of characters, but King Cryptid specifically, I said this character has to go through a trauma that's so great that it shapes his entire path. And it's not just something as plain and simple as, oh, he's a monster, he looks the way he looks, and then that's it. There's a lot more to him, and there's more to him that even he doesn't even remember at this point in time because of the things that he's been through. So that's how that character was kind of shaped. And then thinking about that, okay, so that character went through that. That means that he must be of a certain age. How old do I want to make this character? What kind of stories do I want to tell? Because there's also flashback issues of certain points in time. So once you start going down that road, you got to think, well, historically, do you want to tell a certain story? You got to do your research like that. If you want to have a character that's in a purely fantasy world and you want to have them like 500 years old and they live in a fantasy world, well, then you still got to build up your own world and have to have different events that take place, and that this is what they had been through. So a lot of the time, it's all about you lay one piece down, and then the other piece starts saying, well, what about me? What about me? You got to make sure that you address me. And then the next thing, you start to address that, and then something else is over in the distance saying, "Don't forget about me." And so that's what it's like every single time when I'm creating a story. And that's what I mean when I'll create a story and then like two more start popping up, because I'm laying down the brickwork for all these characters and these events, and there's always events that spiral from those events, or events that led to those events. So that's how those so many stories start to become this thing that, okay, I need to tell a lot of these things, but I can't just tell them all at once, because that's I'm going to explode my own brain, and I'm going to explode the brains of readers and make like 400-page issues, and that's no fun for anybody. So it's making sure that every issue tackles a different story. This way you can get a complete picture, but not the whole picture. And every single issue will build up more and more and more, and lay down little aspects to the world, to the events that are occurring, the progression of characters. Because again, if you don't have characters that go through anything, if you don't have them learn something, if you don't have the characters start off in one place and end up in another, it just kind of becomes this tedious, sort of boring story where nothing has occurred. So if you are ever thinking of, when you create your own characters, or you have this kind of burst of inspiration for something, do the simplest, most instinctual thing you can do. Think about when you hear the word, visualize it. Visualize, well, what does this bring to mind? What imagery do you get? So, you could say whatever the name of a character you have. And does that character sound like a villain or a hero? Does that character sound young or old? Does that character sound male or female? Does that character sound like, and these are all things that sound very controversial nowadays, because there's this binary level of thinking, but you don't need to think in a binary way. Most people don't. That's the kind of weird thing. I think everybody kind of thinks about a million things, and then you distill them into what works for you. So philosophically, think about all these different things of what comes to mind, and then kind of almost like you're visually molding a piece of clay. Picture that you're bringing this character to life. You're molding, this and that and whatever, but you're doing it through your mind. And then the character starts to take shape. And once the character starts to take shape, you can start telling the story. And once you start telling the story to yourself, it becomes very clear of like how this story starts to get laid out. And the interesting thing is that I could say King Cryptid, and I used to teach art workshops at libraries, and I would just tell the students, draw me a mountain. That'll be a warm up. Draw a mountain. Everyone's mountain looks different, because I'd say, as they're drawing, they get like 10 minutes to do it. And I would say, now on this mountain, think about the time of day it is. Think about if there's any kind of snow or greenery on the mountain. Think about if there's any animals in there. Very Bob Rossi, right? And I don't mean Bob Rossi. I mean Bob Ross, E. So think about all these things, literally like what he would have people do, that it's your own little world. Everyone's going to draw something different, and everyone always did draw something different. It'd be a mountain, but it would be different. There'd be different things. The light would hit differently. There'd be different greenery on this side or that side. There'd be snow or ice or whatever. There would be a bird. There would be, different whatever. So you could say anything to anyone, and everyone is going to come up with a different interpretation. So have confidence in the fact that your interpretation is your interpretation. If you sit there constantly trying to say, yeah, but what audience is this for? Which is what a lot of creators end up doing. They say, I got to figure out what audience this is for first. There's an audience for everything. The first person in your audience, though, is you. So if you are not believing in or entertained by the story you are telling, it's going to be damn near impossible to convince anyone else that this story is worth anything. So you have to make sure that you are interested in this story, you are entertained by it. But don't go down the road either, though, of all of a sudden it all just becomes you. It all just becomes, your soapbox, your platform. Tell the story. Don't just, give your autobiography in the story. So it's that kind of a thing where you start all of a sudden having fun with it and get back into that zone of like when you were a kid and you're kind of playing with toys and you're playing pretend, and let your imagination do some work, and you'll start to tell this story, and you can start fleshing it out and building it up. But it's a helpful exercise, I think, for a lot of people out there that, come up with names of characters and just go with it. Don't overthink it. Just go with it. What do you visually see? Get it down. Write down the personality, what comes to mind, all these different kind of traits, and you'll be able to start creating and getting at least the wheels turning on something, because otherwise it really is, it's almost like it seems like an impossible hill to climb, but it's not that tough, just step by step.
Yeah. Now, do you like, because there's sometimes, well, some of the things I run into, because like I love what you're saying, and I feel like I do that process, in a lot of ways. But then do you ever come into these times where you're like, okay, I need kind of this element to my story, like, or like even just like thinking, okay, I've dealt with this one for some reason in some of my stories, like, what were their parents like? Did they have like an angry dad? Was the mom not present? Or was it the dad that was not present and the mom was this, and like, or do they have sibling, like all this, like,
Yeah, or do they have great parents and they raise Superman,
yeah.
you know?
And it's
Because
like, how do you
yeah.
decide on some of these things? Like sometimes I feel like I have like multiple ways I could go, and they're all have sort of interest. They're all kind of sort of interesting, and I'm like, I don't know which one to choose.
Well, with that, again, like, it is about listening to your instinct. It is about going with your gut. And what I mean by that, again, is don't overthink it. So
Mm.
once you start overthinking it, just like when you start to draw a piece and it becomes tortured because you put way too many lines and now the energy is gone and like the pose is gone and the whole composition is gone to crap, because you spend way too much time with it, tinkering. The same thing with writing and with character development. If you start overthinking every single element instead of going with the elements and shoring those up, you start all of a sudden having this gigantic mess. And then every single thing is like, yeah, but that's just like this other thing. And then I shouldn't do it because that's just like that. You could still you could tell 10 million stories about a kid whose parents get killed in an alley. They don't all have to end up like Batman. You could tell 10 million stories about someone who gets bitten by a radioactive spider. They don't all need to end up like Spider-Man. So you could have all these kinds of stories, all these kicking off points, and all these different things that it's still going to be different. It doesn't need to follow the same path. You don't need to end up being completely derivative of what came before or anything along those lines. So, going back to what you were saying, it reminds me a lot of Superman and a lot of people that don't seem to understand Superman. Superman is literally a byproduct of having the parents he had. That's pretty much purely it. Superman is not his power set. Superman is not, his alien heritage. Superman is not that. If you were to dwindle the character of Superman and his personality, it's 100% because he was raised by the people he was raised by. The whole entire story revolves around family and family values. And his values are what they are because he was raised by the Kents. If he was raised by the Luthor family, he'd be a megalomaniac. If he was raised by Batman's parents, and who knows what would have happened? Maybe he would have took the bullet, and then Batman's parents are alive, and God knows where you go with the story from there. So it's all these different things where it's all who he was raised by. So this character has this imprint upon them where you could go in these million different directions, but they go down this one road of he's raised by these people, and then that's why he becomes the man he becomes. So you can have all these different story elements, you can have all these different characters, but you have to stick to that road. Is it fun to explore possibilities? Yeah, you could do that with a different issue. You could do like a parallel universe type of issue. You could do, comics do the multiverse thing too much nowadays. But multiverse stuff is fun as long as you don't turn it into, well, now the multiverse is it, and it's the explanation for bad writing.
Mhm.
So every single decision we made that was really stupid because we didn't stick to continuity at all, multiverse. So as long as you don't go really down that road and you just treat it in a fun kind of aspect, that thing where like there's a portal that opens and a character comes through and it's that character is just like you, but they're different and they're evil or they're whatever it is, but it's because they went through different things. And then they return back or whatever happens or this. You can still have these fun stories. The stories that stick with us, and this is kind of a tragedy of modern storytelling. If you really think about it, the stories that stick with you the most are some of the most simplistic stories. They hit you emotionally, and they tell a good, solid story. That's it. It's not this big, complex, elaborate, clever story, and this convoluted plot with like 10 different twists, and double crosses, and those are fun. But those aren't really the ones that tend to stick with us. The ones that tend to stick with us are very universal. They speak to a lot of different normal things that we've been through and have overcome, and things like that. So if you want to hit your characters the right way, you could tell any story you want, but if you have the characters there, it's always going to be different. So as long as the characters are strong, the characterization is there, the personalities are there, the histories are there, the background is there, you can have the same old story that's been told 100 times before, and it's still going to feel fresh and different and new, because the characters are going to have all these different decisions they make based on their own motivations and their own actions. So there's a whole way to constantly have these really nice, interesting type stories, and not make it feel boring, or it feels familiar, but it doesn't feel like you're just ripping off something that came before or whatever it is. And it's something that will stick with people and hit them in a way that makes them hopefully want to read maybe the next issue. Because that's something else with storytelling. At Alterna, before we had, and this was a product of being the Diamond system, we had miniseries come out. And the purpose of that was to try to get a new number one out. So everything, unfortunately, with storytelling in the traditional market, you have to play to the market. So number one sell. I didn't want to go the variant cover route. That was kind of a firm no. I didn't want to start doing that. It just... Imagine if there were 10 or 20 variants of like Action Comics number one. Would that cover be as iconic? And you think about every other iconic cover you could think of. Would they all still be as iconic if they were one of 20 covers? So to me, that was just a big no. It didn't really feel right. Variant stuff, whatever. If it's a milestone, it felt like, okay, the other guys can do that. So we started telling stories in miniseries to try to get that new number one every new volume. But with King Cryptid, it's an ongoing and it's episodic. So it isn't like this longer form story. And then you put it into a trade. Every single issue can be enjoyed on its own. And because of that, kind of like the way television used to be predominantly, you get these stories where even though maybe one episode or one issue wasn't really that great, you kind of still like the characters and you like the overall gist of the show. So you stick with it and you go and you're like, okay, this one wasn't that great, but the past other couple of ones were pretty good. I'll stick with it for the next one. And then the next one, maybe it's good again. And then you stick with it, and maybe the next one after that's not that great. And so after so many times, you kind of get this average of how is the show leaving you feeling, or the book that you're reading. How is this series leaving you feeling? It's easier to have the audience forgive a bad story when there's one and done. Now, if it's like a 6-parter, and you read like part 2, and part 2 now is just a rotten egg, you're like, do I really want to read the next 4 issues of this? This sucks. It feels like you're in the middle of this story that's trying to out-clever the reader or whatever it is. You're way more likely to just give up on it. But with a comic where every issue is a new adventure, a new story, maybe the one you just read wasn't that great, but you like the characters, you like where it's headed, you give the next one a shot, and then hopefully that one's good, hopefully that one's interesting, or there's a cool new character in there, or whatever it may be. And that's what keeps the reader kind of guessing and entertained and surprised along the way. So that's kind of what King Cryptid is like as well. It's that kind of storytelling format. It's not so much a lot of the modern stuff that we see. It's way more of the comics that we kind of grew up with. It's got more of that 70s, 80s kind of vibe to it. And I hope people dig it. I hope people have fun with it.
Yeah, I mean, I'm certainly can't wait. Like when I saw the IndieGoGo come up, and I backed it and all that, and I'm like, man, the only thing I wish about this is I wish it was coming sooner. I wish I could get it tomorrow.
You and me both. The only thing I wish about it, I wish I was independently wealthy and I could literally just describe all the stories and then just get you the stories whenever they come out. And I'm just like, here you go. It's going to be torture for me, to be perfectly honest, living with the next 10 years of stories. And I have to wait till they come. And I can't really talk too much about them. Oh, goodness.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean it's crazy, and you know, just so you get everybody knows, and thank you for being in the chat. I know we haven't talked too much to the chat or anything, but we see you there. Thank you so much for watching. The link is in the chat for King Cryptid here, and this is kind of the 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 IndieGoGo. Actually, I didn't. I think this is from a couple days ago, maybe. Yes, or one day ago. So that's where we're at. How has this been going? How long is this going on? What are we looking forward to, man?
It's been going pretty good. I think it's on the, let me see, the 17th day. No,
10 days
the
left.
19th day. So yeah, so today it just hit the 10th. 10 days left. It hit that at 9 o'clock tonight, about an hour or so ago when we started actually. We are 17 backers away from 500, which is phenomenal. Thank you guys so much. If you're a backer in the chat, thank you guys. But up next at the 500 backer mark, we're going to unlock a poster, 11 by 17 poster by Nick Hunter. You can see right now it's still classified. At the 25K mark, we're about, I think, like 3,500 or 3,400 from that. We unlock a random King Cryptid trading card from the Series 1. So you get a random one. Every single physical perk backer is going to get one of those. We got a lot of bonuses on this campaign for you guys.
Yeah,
But,
I was hoping.
yeah.
I couldn't wait till you got to the 500. I was like, I kept looking. Is it gonna be 500 backers? Because I want that 11 by 17 right there. That looks awesome.
Yeah. No, that one it's great. Nick is doing some fantastic work. We got Christian Rossi on issue 1. We got Nick Hunter on issue 2. Alex Jovich on 3. Kier Covington on issue 4. And then Christian Rossi's doing the colors on issue 4 as well. But the artists on this series so far have just been fantastic, and they've been so great to work with. Easily the best experience I've ever had creating anything in comics. And it's just been so much fun. And that's another thing too, is like I said before, but bringing characters back and paying attention to the readers and the characters they like. The same thing too with the artists. So if they're really digging the artists that are on these 4 issues, I want them all to come back, and they're all going to come back again at some point anyway, because it's been amazing working with all of them. But if they're really digging a specific artist and they're like, oh, you should do something with them and, get them back for another issue, I can pay attention to that and bring these artists hopefully to come back. So every issue is going to have a new artist, unless, of course, it's like a story arc. So if it's like a 3-parter, we'll stick with the same artist. This way, just for the sake of keeping it consistent. But other than that, every issue is going to have a different artist, and I don't mean every single issue is going to be an entirely new artist, but we won't have the same issue the same artist on 2 issues at a time. So this way also we can get a bunch of artists on there, and then they can have their stories. I play up to their strengths with the kind of story that they can tell. Christian Rossi is really great with stuff that kind of has a horror vibe to it. And so he can play with shadows really well, and the compositions. So he's got issue 1 with the Behemoth, and the Behemoth is a genetic experiment. He's a human hybrid of the legendary Mothman mixed with this human being who kind of went in for this procedure. One of the lines that he's going to have in the book is that they promised to make me better, but instead they made me a monster. So it's this kind of thing where he's not necessarily a bad guy, but he's doing things out of his rationale. He's scared. He's been hurt. He's been tortured. He's been mutated, and he doesn't know friend from foe. So King Cryptid is not his foe, and he's trying here to explain in these pages 8 and 9, trying to kind of stand his ground against this imposing creature, but also not hurt him at the same time. So he's trying to appeal to him, and he realizes that Behemoth does not understand what the hell King Cryptid is saying. So King Cryptid, having the psychic ability to talk to cryptids and animals, he begins to try to psychically reach out to the creature here. So that's what he's saying. He's basically saying, I'm not here to hurt you. I'm your friend. So this whole thing here, there's someone after the Behemoth. They end up being after both King Cryptid and the Behemoth, but the Behemoth is not really the villain of this particular issue, but he is the harbinger for things to come. And there's a supernatural, the supernatural world and the mortal world are starting to clash. With the advancement of technology and all these other kinds of things, the barriers are kind of breaking. So King Cryptid he's been in a nice seclusion, a nice peaceful life in the White Mountains of New Hampshire for about 30 years. That was the last time he was spotted. He's coming out of hiding essentially now, and he's getting sucked into this war that's brewing. And if you guys are familiar at all with the Mothman story, he's viewed kind of as a harbinger of doom or maybe a bringer of doom. No one really knows the way that story goes. But just like this, it kicks off issue 1. Even though this isn't the Mothman, he's still derived from the genetic material of the Mothman. And he's kind of kicking off this is what's about to start heading down towards King Cryptid and what's in store for the rest of the world. So we have that kind of issue kicking it off. With issue 2, we got Nick Hunter. He's doing an amazing job. It's a black and white issue. Nick is a tremendous artist. I don't even know if I can have the words to truly explain how talented he is. But bringing him on board with this, when he was doing character sketches, it was just phenomenal to see the stuff that he was doing. Very animated. I think, honestly, he is an animator by trade. Very animated, very expressive, but very iconic. There was something kind of reminded me of Thundercats a bit about the way that he's drawing this character. Like I could see King Cryptid as one of those side characters of Thundercats. But in this issue, we have King Cryptid on the night of a new moon. His powers are very low because they wax and wane with the phases of the moon. So on tonight, which is a full moon, King Cryptid is at his most powerful. He can lift or move up to 10 tons. He can fly at speeds over 200 miles per hour. His psychic abilities are heightened. His healing factor is much higher than it normally is. So he's almost invulnerable and super powerful on the night of a full moon. But on the night of a new moon, his power set is very, very limited. His moonstone basically enhances his powers. And that's what kind of is ebbing and flowing here with the rays of the moon that are able to reach that moonstone and charge it up. So on the night of a new moon, what happens is he finds this wolf here. The issue starts off where he finds this wolf dying at the side of the road. And he tries with the last bit of juice that he has left to magically kind of heal this wolf, to psychically heal him. So he does. He succeeds in that, and that's on the next page. But by doing that, he kind of drains the last bit of his moonstone energy. But it's okay, because he figures, well, I'm on the way back to the cave layer that I have. There's a cosmic spring there, and he's going to heal up. He's going to recharge and rest in the cave the way he normally does every new moon, and things will be okay. Unfortunately, on this night, the Granite Beast is waiting for him in this cave layer, and the Granite Beast is claiming this cave as his ancestral home. An ancient rock beast, thousands of years ago, crashed into the side of the cave, and that's what carved out and created this cave. And that's what also created this cosmic spring that actually heals and restores King Cryptid. So the Granite Beast isn't aware of King Cryptid, who he is, what he is, his power set, the new moon, the moonstone. He just doesn't know any of that. All he knows is King Cryptid is essentially living in his home, and he wants him gone. But the thing is, King Cryptid doesn't want to be gone. He wants to be in that cosmic spring, because if he doesn't get to it in time, he's going to revert back to a feral killing machine form and consume and feed and kill and everything for about a day or so until he gets restored through the life essence of creatures or humans. So he doesn't want to do that. He wants to just go to the cosmic spring, have a nice time, wake up, and the next day he's fine. The Granite Beast, though, doesn't want any of that. He wants him gone. He wants him dead. So that's the conflict here with issue 2. We learned a bit about the Moonstone. We learned some of the history there. And we're introduced to another character, of course, the Granite Beast. With issue 3, this takes place September 19th, 1984. The date is 23 years, the anniversary of the Betty and Barney Hill abduction in Lincoln, New Hampshire. And that's one of the first recorded, if not the first recorded, UFO abduction in the United States. So kids here, we got Eric, we got Ernie, Linda, and Eric's brother, Jeff. And they're all like... What was that?
You also have Tiny Tim, of course.
And yeah, and Tiny Tim, we got Alex Jovich, the artist on the issue, put a little Easter egg with the Tiny Tim hat. So Timey's on there, but he just makes a little cameo on the hat. But so in this issue, the kids are out. They think this is a nice, nice night to go look for paranormal things. King Cryptid in particular, they're in the Lincoln, New Hampshire area. They're going to go in the White Mountain Forest, and they're going to go do some paranormal investigating and ghost hunting and all the other kinds of things. They just saw Ghostbusters a couple months ago. They're obsessed with everything paranormal. So these kids, they go off to do all this stuff. They read the books. They're all into the stuff with Bigfoot and King Cryptid and everything. But Jeff, the younger brother, is a skeptic, and he's a 10-year-old, but he's a little crap of a 10-year-old, and he gives his older brother and his friends a lot of crap about believing in any of this stuff. At one point in time, the next page here, yeah, we see that up top. He's like, why is he called King Cryptid? That's a stupid name. He's like, what is he, like, rule over a bunch of Bigfoots? And so they tell him, well, it's because of what he looks like. They say, yeah, his silhouette. He's got like a crown and a cape. And then Eric's explaining, yeah, but it's more than that. Maybe he is king of a bunch of cryptids, but he's a hero. That's why they're interested in him, because he's not just like a Bigfoot or whatever else. Like, there's heroic exploits of this character. So he talks about a story where he saved a child from a bear. Linda talks about how the shape of King Cryptid leaves this silhouette on the moon. And then Ernie is talking about these stories that he's heard where, maybe he's an Indian chief that got turned into a creature. And, they're all into it and they're dead serious. And then at the end, Jeff is just laughing his ass off. So you have him giving them shit the whole time. And this is an all ages issue, but yeah.
Did you write this into the script, the part where you see the imagery almost of the flashbacks in the flashlight, like, because that's freaking genius.
Yeah, that's what's been so fun about making these stories too, is that the way I write the scripts, I don't have everything set up with what this character will say and do this and then do that. I give a breakdown of each page and I set it up like a scene. So I'm telling a story to the artist, and then the artist is interpreting the story. So I go, they're walking through the forest and they all start telling their stories about, Eric tells a story about King Cryptid wrestling a bear and saving a child. Linda tells a story about King Cryptid, and so it's all these kinds of things. And then the artists come in there and then they interpret it. And if I need to revise anything, or I tell them, maybe like put an emphasis on this, we'll do that. But honestly, between the 4 issues, I only had to maybe do 5 or 6 revisions on all 4 issues. But I come in there afterwards and put all that down there. Alex did a great job though with this page.
Yeah, I mean, I love that whole thing of like the story is in the flashlight. Like, I don't know, it's just like an ingenious way. It's like an extra panel.
Yeah. Oh, he did a phenomenal job, and he got to a point where he was telling me, when I read this scene, I'm picturing the page like this. It would be okay if I do that, and I'm like, honestly, that's 100% how I pictured it. So I'm glad that you got it that way. And after 3 or 4 times, he's like, you know what? I'm just going to do it, and if you don't like it, we'll revise it. He's like, because obviously we're on the same page, and I'm like, exactly, just go for it. That's why I'm bringing the artists on board as well, because I want what they're bringing to the table. I don't want to kind of micromanage how they set up every single scene. There's going to be some scenes where I'm like, focus on this character, or get this reaction shot, or here's a splash page, or whatever it may be. But I'm not saying, this page, 7 panels, this character is going to say this, and then zoom in on that character, and then, aerial shot of this character. The scripts aren't like that. The scripts are very much telling the story and then letting the artists visually interpret the story being told.
Is it broken down by pages at least, I'm assuming?
Yeah. So it's broken down by, this page. So this would be page, I believe this is page 4. If I'm remembering correctly. I think it's page 3 and 4. No, this is page 6. It's page 5 and 6. 3 and 4 are for issue 4. So this is page 6. So it'll say page 6, and then it'll describe what's occurring. And then I go in there afterwards and I put in the dialogue or any captions or any thought balloons or things like that. So the artists, when they actually end up reading the book, they're going to actually see the whole fully fleshed out thing with dialogue and everything else. Because there's some moments where they do a great job, and I can pull back on what I have the characters saying or doing. And then there's other moments where maybe I need to put in a little bit more, or I can put in a little bit more, and so I do that. But yeah, these guys did such a terrific job, and I can't imagine these stories being just as great without them. It's been truly amazing working with them.
I think it's like really cool. Like you usually when you establish, a character, I mean, I don't know if I remember any other time in comics. I'm sure it's happened before, but like I can't think at this moment of an example where your each issue is a different artist. Like obviously artists change hands and then they have a run and then that's kind of traditionally how it goes. But this is interesting and it's especially cool because you're kind of playing to each artist's strength. Like this obviously like this artist for this issue is like perfect. Like I don't
Yeah,
know.
yep.
It's pretty cool.
Yeah. Same thing with Nick Hunter and his art. I thought, I saw his black and white art. His line art is fantastic. And I thought, this would be really great to tell the night of a new moon inside of a cave with one real light source coming through. And he's so great with the shadows. And then Alex, he's so perfect with expressiveness and he's great with drawing kids. Because some artists, they'll draw kids and they just look like tiny adults and it's creepy.
Uh-huh.
So with his work here, he did such a fantastic job. They all look like kids. He got like the clothes down. I described what they would sort of be wearing. I gave him some reference with that, but other than that, it's he just went with it and he got it. And it's spectacular to see what they were doing. But yeah, I'm trying to play to their strengths. And there was some artists that weren't available that I wanted for the first 4 issues, but I was like, I can just kind of plug and play kind of different stories here and put in an issue that maybe I would have told next year. And instead I put it in with this one this year because this artist is currently available. And then the artist for next year will work on a story that would have been in this year. But the reader would never know because these are episodic type of stories. So you could read issue 4, which is what we're looking at right now, and still understand what's happening, who the characters are, the story that's progressing, all these kinds of things, because the characterization is there. Whereas sometimes you'd feel like if you're reading issue 4, you go, oh man, I don't know. If I can't get my hands on the first 3, I'm lost. That's not the case with King Cryptid. You can read issue 40 when that comes out and still enjoy it and go, oh, I gotta get the other 39. So with issue 4 here, we have King Cryptid. The day is starting off. This is page 3. The first 2 pages were the setup for what occurs here. This is page 3, and it starts off with the day is beginning. King Cryptid is inside of his cave lair, and Kier Covington with Christian Rossi on colors do such an amazing job with the art. But we got King Cryptid kind of resting up during the day. He's a little depowered during the day as well. It's nothing like the new moon, but he's nowhere near as strong as he is at night. But something compels him, wakes him up, and he hears a cry for help, a psychic cry for help. Something is communicating to him, and it's coming so strong. And even though it's over 100 miles away, King Cryptid is woken up from his sleep. So he hasn't heard this voice in ages. He takes off. He goes right out of his cave and he tries to follow where the psychic signal is coming from. So he's going towards Huckamuck Swamp in Massachusetts, which is in Bridgewater, Massachusetts. For those that don't know,
Miles per hour.
yeah, he just blasts right out of that cave. He gets there in about a half hour or so. And Huckamuck Swamp, for those that don't know, in the Bridgewater Triangle region, is this? It's got a lot of paranormal history to it. There's been cryptid sightings, there's been UFO sightings, there's been a lot of different things that have occurred over the years. Huckamuck is pretty much Algonquin for a place where spirits dwell. And we have Broog the Swamp Monster, which lives in Huckamuck Swamp. King Cryptid is kind of sensing him here. He's saying that he's lost the psychic signal, but he feels there's a lot of dark energy in the area, and he feels something particular that's pretty powerful. He notices there's some people that are at the bottom that are down there. There's a cryptozoologist team, and he thinks that maybe these people have something to do with what's occurring, but he doesn't know what their deal is, so he goes and he gets into the forest, and he kind of scopes out and tries to see if he can listen to their conversation to get a better idea of what's occurring. So those are pages 3 and 4, and that whole story sets up Broog the Swamp Monster and introduces him, and the terrible secret of Brug, because he's got a pretty messed up origin in terms of how he was created as well. Brug, unlike the Behemoth, or, well, I guess he's similar a little bit to the Granite Beast. The Granite Beast is something that is I guess of a natural phenomena, where he's descended from a rock beast. But Brug is created and doesn't actually, even though he's sentient, he doesn't really have much intelligence to him, and we discover why eventually in the issue. But this one, it really gives King Cryptid a run for his money in terms of the fight that ensues, and it builds and sets a lot of stuff forward for the next batch of issues, if not for the rest of the series. So we found out a lot of things in this issue that actually reveal quite a bit. So I'll have to keep my mouth shut on those things, unfortunately.
I love the art style on this, and like you said, Christian Rossi did the colors. Like, to me, like I cannot wait to see this particular issue in newsprint, because it's just like that classic coloring from back in the days of newsprint and stuff. And
Yeah.
work too.
That's very much intentional. I wanted Christian to, because he colored issue 1 as well, but I wanted Christian to really just have a limited palette, and go with this kind of like two-tone flat system that used to be prevalent in so many comics. I want this to be like the newsprint-ish newsprint issue we've ever done, and I want, honestly, most of the King Cryptid color work to have that kind of vibrancy to it. Alex's has that kind of vibrancy too, but his artwork is a little more animated and modern, as opposed to Kier, who really has that throwback style. It kind of reminds me of, like, if you took a little bit of like Art Adams and mixed it with a little bit of Todd McFarlane on the Hulk, you would get Kier's work on this issue. He just did a great job, and it's so much fun. And seeing the colors, like you said, I can't wait to see them on the newsprint.
And I love seeing, I've loved watching some of, like, you guys, the art auction shows and stuff. And Kier has done so many cool, like, King Cryptids. It's insane.
Yeah, it's amazing. And he'll just do stuff for fun. I mean, the poster we're giving away for the pre-launch backers, he just showed that to me one day. It was like, oh, I just made this. I was like, you just made this? I was like, well, we have to do something with this. It's just this amazing poster. What was that?
Is this the one for the front pocket? Is that him too?
Yeah, that's another one that he just did out of nowhere. It's like, this is crazy. You're doing amazing work. Him and Nick were both doing these amazing pieces, like piece after piece, of just like having fun and just showing it to me. And that's honestly what spurred me to have the flip book style 2 covers on each issue, because they were giving me 2 front cover worthy covers. I was like, I can't not have one of these just sitting around somewhere or just on a sticker, and that's all it ever is. So we have on each side, the front cover and the back cover is a cover. So there's no variants or anything like that with this. There's a blank variant that you could sketch on and things like that, but there's no variant issues or anything at all. But every issue you get essentially 2 covers for 1 issue.
That's so awesome. I'm so looking forward to seeing this, reading this, and I think I just saw something else. I'm gonna have to back it once again. So,
What'd you see?
The script, because after I heard
okay,
on the script with the artist, I'm like, now I want to see that too. So I'm gonna have to go back in and do another one.
yeah, you could see the whole breakdown that I have for the 4 issues, and then also I do a detailed character description. I gave them all references too for the characters with the art. I drew that up so they could see where to go. But I give them personality and their height, weight, all that kind of stuff, what they would look like, and the rundown. And some of them I give them some background information that's kind of spoilery. So there's a couple different things in the script that are going to spoil future issues, but hopefully it just kind of adds to the fun of it. But yeah, so you get to see all the first 4 issues, how they're broken down and how I'm putting them together.
Awesome. Well, that's really cool, man. I definitely got a lot of takeaways. I love what you were saying about how every character kind of has a series of traumas and stuff. I wrote that one down. I'm like, all right, I'm gonna try to work that into some things and all that. There's a lot of good stuff here, and I'm super excited about this comic. So everybody, like I said, the link is in the description. We also put it in the chat a couple times. Go over there and, you know, support slash just, I mean, to me, like after hearing all this story, like why why wouldn't you support? Like I'm like, this is, I just want to read. I can't
Thank
wait
you,
to
man.
read it, you know. So
Yeah, well, the thing is that's great about Alterna is they're the most affordable comics at this point, I think, on the planet. Um, they're like $1.99 an issue. On the campaign, I'm going to sign the issues too, so you can get the first 4 issues plus the blank variant, and you can either commission an artist to draw on that or draw on it yourself, or if you want, just never draw on it and just maintain it. That's perfectly fine, whatever you want to do. But you get technically, I guess, 5 issues, and it's $15. And if you're in the U.S., shipping is $5. We've got add-ons and stuff there too, but shipping's free for those. Right now, we've got a full moon special, so for 24 hours, it'll be up until 1 o'clock Eastern tomorrow. We've got a glow-in-the-dark sticker with King Cryptid's head, the art of Christian Rossi for King Cryptid's head in front of a full moon, and the sticker will glow in the dark. So that's just $3 and free shipping worldwide. But we do just fun things on the campaign with that. I have new moon and full moon specials that kind of coincide with King Cryptid and his power set, that kind of a thing. There's the case, the King Cryptid collector case, and this thing is a beaut. So it opens up. We got King Cryptid's eyes,
oh, that's cool.
and then you see the interior art. And it'll arrive shrink wrap too. So here's a shrink wrap one, in case you want to be a collector about it and never really open it up. But we're gonna have 5 of these throughout the years. So the spines, when you get all 5, it adds up and makes the larger image. And you can see the full image on the campaign as well. But just fun stuff that we can't really do if this was to just go a traditional route. Crowdfunding it has been great, and getting people just so supportive and excited about the book it just means the world. So I'm so glad that people are into it, and hopefully, we'll be doing this for a very long time. Like I said, I'm going to be doing this my whole life, and hopefully people are there for the journey. I think it's going to be a lot of fun, and it all starts now. So maybe 20 years from now we'll do another stream down the road. I'm not saying that that's the next one we're doing. But we'll be old men, and we'll be all like, hey, remember you said you were gonna do like I can't believe you did 100 issues. Here we are with 100 issues.
That would be so cool, though. I mean, and I think one thing that's cool too is like, and I know you get this question all the time because I hear people ask it on the streams and stuff, and I think I've even asked it at one point. Is like, what you're doing all these, publishing all these comics. Are you gonna make a comic and stuff? And I'm like, now he's writing this comic and got all these cool artists on it and stuff. So I'm like, kind of over the moon about this because I think we all would like, to see what you have like in your imagination for like a story. So I don't know. In my opinion, I do at least.
Thank you, man. Yeah, I appreciate it. It's seriously, I'm looking forward to getting all these stories out there. It's gonna be painful for me to keep them all under wraps, and I'm sure I'm gonna have even more stories by the time I get done with next year's 4 stories, and then after that, it's even more. It's I'm just kind of torturing myself here with all the stories I'm gonna have to not tell until it's time. But I'm giving away little things here and there. I mean, next year we're gonna have the White Mountain Yeti. We're gonna have UFOs next year. We're gonna have extraterrestrials in an issue. We're gonna have a large dragon that's making a nest out of the old man of the mountain up in New Hampshire. We're gonna have all kinds of fun stuff for next year. But right now, the first 4 issues, we're getting started with these characters and these stories, and it's just so much fun. I hope you guys have as much fun reading them as we're having making them.
Yeah, totally. I think people will for sure. So yeah, everybody, thank you once again for watching, and of course, thank you, Peter. What's the best way people can find you outside of the links that are already in the description?
Twitter is probably the best way at Peter Simeti. Instagram as well at Peter Simeti Art. And I'm not on Facebook anymore. But other than that, the best way is just Twitter and Instagram, and go to alternacomics.com and check out all the great comics there too. If you don't believe anymore that comics can be fun and escapist and have stories that contain a lot of adventure and heart, go to alternacomics.com and we'll make a believer out of you.
Yes, I love that, and I can vouch for that because I've read a whole bunch of them. I have most of them, so and I've enjoyed them. So yeah, definitely, guys, do that. And thank you for watching once again, and we'll talk to you guys next time.
Thanks so much, man. Thank you, everybody in the chat. Appreciate it.